everybody. Welcome to the first show of Daily Coast. This is the brief of 2021. Every year, Carrie, I have a hard time switching years. I don't think I'm going to have problems this year because I am so done with 2020.
Everyone I have heard from is so done with 2020. And I just a reminder, everybody wear your mask. We're not through the crisis yet.
We're not through the crisis.
Not even close. So, but yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say the gravitational pull of 2020 is so strong that we're still dealing with 2020 this week, right?
It's just going to go on and on. I mean, partly because Trump and Republicans have just left such a major mess to clean up that, we're going to be dealing with the 2020 residue for months and really even years, frankly, from this presidency.
So, Carrie, before you continue, I just realized, since I'm a little out of practice, I had that long holiday break, that I didn't even introduce us. So everybody watching and listening, since this is now going to be a podcast, I am Marcos Molitzis. I am the founder of Daily Coast. And my co-host with me here is Carrie Eleveld. She is a senior staff writer. I think you're a senior staff writer at Daily Coast. She is a kick-ass staff writer at Daily Coast. I think that should be her title. And this has been a YouTube show. We started last year as a sort of test run, and I think we decided it was a really successful test run. So not only are we continuing the YouTube show, but we are now going to also have a companion podcast.
Frankly, there were a lot of people clamoring to hear from us and not actually see us at the same time, which is why, the whole voice for TV, face for radio situation. So here we are. We're headed for.
I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that at all. I think what it is people like to work out and do their commutes. Although, is anybody commuting these days? Essential workers are commuting. People like to listen to podcasts while they are doing other things in a way that they can't watch us. So it makes sense for us to do the podcast version. I'm excited to do so. If those of you who have been watching this show may realize that now we have these fancy microphones in the camera shot that we did not have before. That's because the sound had to be better. We'll be working on that. Make sure we have podcast quality audio tracks. So all that aside, I'm glad we introduced ourselves. I'm Marcos. Carrie is with me. We do this show every Tuesday, 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 Eastern. That's when we do it live, but of course it'll be a podcast as well. So Carrie, it is still 2020 as far as Washington, D.C. and the state of Georgia are concerned, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think everybody's on pins and needles, of course, with what's going to happen. And we're going to spend a lot of time on Georgia today. Like, that is our main focus, because it is going to, the outcome there will, of course, dictate just exactly what the Biden administration is able to get done or not get done in terms of those two Senate runoffs. But one thing I wanted to just point out, which I think is, been a little bit undercovered and overshadowed by the Georgia runoffs at the moment, is certainly what has been covered is Donald Trump's effort, this sort of fascist coup effort to overturn the election, right? But I think one of the undercovered aspects of it in some ways has been this revolt within the Senate GOP caucus, the Senate Republican caucus, where now 13 senators have said they're going to object to the election results. None of them are offering any proof that anything went wrong. They're just saying their voters, their voters in their state feel
they're not even pretending, right? They're not even going through the motions of claiming that it's fraud. It's people are concerned.
Yeah, people are concerned. So we're going to object to the electoral college votes, which is, it's going nowhere, right? Let's just say that. Like, I don't think this is real concern in any way. It's going nowhere. It's people burnishing their far right credentials, particularly, senators like Josh Hawley of Missouri and Ted Cruz of Texas, in order to, it's their first, getting on the 2024 radar.
It's the first debate of 2024, basically.
Right, But what I do think is interesting is Senator Mitch McConnell, who is the leader of the GOP caucus, was cautioning against this. And he tried really hard, actually, to get people not to do it. Not because he's any like generous statesman or anything like that. You know what I mean? Like he's more than happy to shred the Senate and shred the U.S. institutions as long as he stays in power. Yep. But I think he really wanted Trump to be in the rearview mirror, and he would be the most powerful Republican, moving forward into Biden's administration in the nation. And he lost control of his caucus, and I think what that means is just a terrible next couple of years in terms of the GOP ripping itself apart. There's going to be loyalty tests to Trump. There's going to be GOP primaries for everyone who didn't sign on to this bogus effort to overturn the election.
I think that's it, Carrie. Very, very clearly, McConnell doesn't care about democracy. So the cultural damage that is being done to this country by this effort, he doesn't care about that. I mean, quite clearly, he doesn't care about legacy. He's the most hypocritical person in the world, and he's happily so. I think he thinks it's funny at this point. But one of his jobs as majority leader is to protect his senators, to protect his caucus. And by forcing them, a big chunk of them, to vote against this undemocratic coup attempt, by forcing them to vote against that, what's going to happen is going to invite primary challenges. And like you said, it is going to sunder the Republican Party apart. Had nobody objected, then there would not have been a need for any of these votes. And therefore, all of his not crazy caucus would have been inoculated the ones that are up for re-election in 2022 would have been inoculated. That's no longer the case. And it is a very big battleground in 2022. So he has every interest. I mean, and if you really want to just start crying right now, the main Senate battlegrounds are literally the same presidential battlegrounds. It's Wisconsin, Iowa, Pennsylvania, Florida, Georgia, Arizona, North Carolina. So we're going to relitigate 2020 all over again. So at least Pennsylvania is an open seat. Iowa's going to probably be an open seat. Some of these, the primaries in those states are really probably going to revolve around who the Trumpiest is, which is not a great place, particularly Pennsylvania. It's not a great place for the Republican Party to be. Iowa, it's getting away from us, but Pennsylvania is still a real competitive state. But you have incumbents.
Georgia's going to be competitive one way or the other.
Well, of course. And so, but you have these incumbents Ron Johnson in Wisconsin already has signed on, right? So he's gone. He belongs to Moscow, always did. But Florida, Marco Rubio is going to have to deal with this vote. There's going to be lot of.
Can you imagine an Ivanka Trump primary to Marco Rubio or Rick Scott?
I want to root for it because it would be so delicious. But then imagine if she won.
But what this does mean for sure, inevitably, is that caucus is going to go further to the right. So you think about something that isn't a battleground, like South Dakota, where Senator John Thune is, right? And Trump's already pushing a primary against John Thune from Kristi Noem, the South Dakota governor there. So Democrats aren't going to win South Dakota, right? Am I wrong? I don't want to douse anybody's hopes. But the point is that if John Thune gets primaried by Kristi Noem, who's really honestly was almost clearly aiming for herd immunity in that state, and she just devastated the state with her stewardship or non-stewardship of the pandemic. In any case, if she was to win that primary, she would end up being the senator from South Dakota. So instead of having John Thune, who's a somewhat reasonable character. No, he's milquetoast, but he's a somewhat reasonable character. He's the one who was saying, look, these objections to the election results are ridiculous, and they're not gonna win the day. So why even go through the effort? I mean, that's why he attracted Trump's ire, right? Then you get firebrand,
Yeah. Now she
I
said
don't even
she's
know what
not
to call
running.
her without offending someone. But anyway, but like just a firebrand like Kristi Noem in his stead. So that just means that whole caucus is going to go further right and anti-democratic and pro-fascist.
Yeah, no, she said she's not running, and it's obvious that she's running for president. So that particular challenge may not happen, but it's South Dakota. There are plenty of Republicans and plenty of Trumpy Republicans. Sure. So he's going to have a challenger. It's inevitable. Question is how much damage they're going to be able to do, how much juice Trump will actually have in 2 years after being out of power, out of the limelight for that long. And clearly he's sort of descending. The president is descending into Q territory, right? Like he's completely gone to conspiracy theory land.
Fox News just isn't. It's not doing it for him and his.
It's not doing it anymore. And Trump needs to hear what he wants to hear. And the only people left saying that it's the Q crowd. It's OANN, Newsmax, that crowd. So it'll be interesting to see once he doesn't have the protections that Twitter gave him as president. Once he is no longer the center of attention, he'll try so hard to keep being the center of attention. But I don't know. We'll see what effect that has. And actually today, we're going to find out. Not today, when the votes are finally counted. So just to make clear, in November, Donald Trump was leading Georgia by like 8 or 9 points, when everybody pretty much went to sleep Tuesday night, right? So just remember that it's a lot of votes to count. It's going to take a few days to count. I think it was Friday when Biden officially took the lead after the November election. Now, I was saying earlier that Biden was going to take the lead just because you track county by county, but the official count is going to probably take a few days. So just keep that in mind, unless it's a blowout. Nobody's expecting a blowout either direction.
Right.
But we're going to find out. Carrie, you wrote a piece, I think it was today or maybe yesterday, on just how much we can learn about the next 2 years of elections by who turns out tonight. Mm-hmm. And I know I have written quite a bit on what I'm calling the hidden deplorable, or the nicer way to call them would be the Trump only voters. And we've seen these voters, they defy polling because they don't answer polls. They are truly deplorables. They are the worst of the worst. They don't answer pollsters because they've lost all faith in all institutions. There's actual research on this that shows that they're all loners. Like nobody wants to hang out with them because they're all such a-holes. And so they are the core of Trump's support, and they did not turn out in any of the midterm elections or off-year elections between 2020 and 2016 and 2020. They only turned out when Donald Trump is on the ballot. Right. And today we're going to find out if they turn out for Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, the Republican Senate incumbents in Georgia.
Because goodness knows Loeffler and Perdue have done nothing but focus on those voters, on getting those voters to turn out. They have run extremely hard right campaigns focusing on those voters.
One of the we're going to bring on some guests here in a second, but one of the most amazing moments of the 2020 election cycle was when Kelly Loeffler ran she had a challenge from the right, a candidate who was challenging from the right to make it into the runoff election. And she was supposed to be the moderate, suburban, white woman that was going to keep Republican defections in the suburbs from happening, right? But she's got this, his name is Doug Collins, I believe, right? Yep. Doug Collins is challenging her from the right. So she runs an ad where she compares herself to Attila the Hun. And this is the sort of the perfect encapsulation of modern Republican Party, right? I mean, because there's no Hun legacy, civilization, and Hun art, and Hun music, and Hun monuments, and Hun ruins, and Hun poetry and philosophy. The Attila the Hun was known for one thing, and that was for destroying, raping, pillaging, and nearly extorting the Roman Empire into insolvency. They are a destructive force, and that's why it appeals to that Trump-only voter, because they don't think their life is going to get any better. They live in meth country. They have no jobs. They've been outsourced to China and Mexico and overseas. They don't believe in government bailing them out because Republicans in general have sort of stripped government down to its bare essence and made it harder to actually help people. And so it's easy to message to them and say, look at all those Black people in the city. They're getting all the money. And if you're one of these people sort of stuck in this rural, dying America, all the youth are leaving, you can't avail of yourself of the benefits of urban, civilized American culture, right? Because it's so expensive. You definitely can't live in the city. It's prohibitively expensive. But even going to a baseball game, it's a couple $100 to go to a baseball game, right? So they're sort of really cut off from the educational, cultural opportunities, even fine dining, right? These food, just fresh food. They don't even have that. So
yeah, fresh food.
So they're sort of out in the outs, and so they just want to burn the whole thing down. And that's why Trump has been so effective. And that's why it hasn't translated to any other Republican politician, because most of them have a governing philosophy, for better or for worse, right? It's like, give me more of my money. I don't want to pay taxes. I'm a selfish a-hole, right? At least there's that. Trump doesn't even have that, right? Trump is about destroying norms and institutions and traditions. And that's why he's so popular. And so that's what Kelly Loeffler in that ad, I'm Attila the Hun, right? It's like, I destroy stuff. And okay, it helped her get to the run-up. It actually worked. That was an appealing approach for her to take.
Well, it worked in the primary. It worked in the primary. The question is whether it works in the general, right? I mean, or in the runoff. I mean, it didn't boost. Well, she was running in a you can't compare her primary because it had several, people in it compared to a runoff. There's no way to compare those two. But what you're talking about. So I think a lot of people have been wondering, rightfully, and like you talk about, whether or not these voters are going to turn out when Trump isn't on the ticket, right? He begged them in the gubernatorial races in Kansas and in Louisiana in 2018 for his voters to turn out, because it was going to be a huge stain on his record if Democrats won those races. He begged, and guess what? They didn't turn out. They didn't care. They didn't want to vote for. They don't care. So there is this huge question of whether or not these folks are going to turn out for to elect two politicians that they don't really believe in or love, even though, they've been, Loeffler and Perdue have been actively courting them, in order to secure Republican control of an institution that they don't really care about because they hate Washington.
Yeah, they hate McConnell.
They hate McConnell. So, it is an open question whether or not they're going to turn out. But the other side of that, and I think some people have kind of, not really focused on, or that's been such an overarching question, so dominant that less time has been spent on this, is whether or not those sort of moderate, Republican voters who couldn't bring themselves to vote for Trump because he was just so, icky and toxic, that whether or not they're going to come back to the GOP fold. And I think the assumption has been that they would, because as we know, Biden outperformed Democratic candidate John Ossoff, and I keep on thinking of Vote Your Ossoff today. Anyway, I saw an ad for Vote Your Ossoff, but anyway, so not to get derailed on that. But and so Perdue actually did better. You have to imagine some of those voters, some of those more moderate voters who couldn't vote for Trump, actually did vote for Senator Perdue. But given the posture that both Loeffler and Perdue have taken, you have to wonder if those sort of moderate Republican voters are really getting the whiff now and the understanding, because this is the truth of the matter, that to vote for a Republican anymore is to vote for a bunch of anti-democracy, pro-fascist party. I mean, that's where the party is headed, right? I mean, can you vote for a Republican in good conscience and still believe in democracy? Because the party has spent the last 5 or 6 weeks proving that it didn't believe in democracy and still doesn't. It doesn't believe in the will of the people and people selecting their electors rather than their electors selecting who gets to vote, right?
And it's very sort of fitting that one of those states that is being challenged is Georgia, and Georgia obviously is the center of the political universe today. So it's time for us to bring our first guest, Carrie. I think it's Monique, right?
I think so.
It is.
Yes.
Hi,
Yes.
Monique.
Oh my God. Such a well-oiled machine here.
I love that wallpaper. She's a senior campaign director at Daily Kos, and she's been in charge of a lot of the activism, working with our community in Georgia. And Monique, let me thank you for joining us, first of all. And first of all, one of the questions after the general election was whether liberal intensity could maintain after this long effort to get rid of Trump, right? And there was this whole Georgia runoff, they sort of drop off and they're gonna be too tired or they don't realize how important it is. And so from your vantage point, was there a drop off in liberal intensity for the Georgia runoff?
I would say absolutely not. Actually, by the numbers, the thing that we can see is that the intensity has grown substantially. Right, we're seeing people who didn't vote during the general election in 2020 who turned out to vote for this. They didn't just turn out to vote; they turned out to vote early in this election. So thanks for having me, because Georgia turned blue and the Senate will too.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Look at that.
There was over 100,000. I think it's about 120,000. I saw people who had
112,000. I think is what it was.
112 as of a couple of days ago. So there's still early vote coming in today, actually. Mm-hmm. People who had not voted before, had not voted before, who are voting now, and it was disproportionately Black, disproportionately young. So that really just says it's the Democratic vote. Monique, did you see any of that happening from your perspective doing your work?
Yes. I mean, I'll just offer most of the work that we do on the advocacy team is with the organizations on the ground. And there are just so many incredible organizations that we work with. I don't want to list them all because I'll miss somebody and then I'll feel bad about it because they are also important. But a lot of what we're seeing is some really strategic and soulful organizing happening on the ground. And the way that actually shakes out is that communities themselves are organizing themselves. So it's not an organizer like me coming in from Tennessee and knocking random doors or whatever. It's folks who live in that neighborhood knocking their neighbor's door, which it makes all the difference because we're not spending time building up trust. We're spending time building power, which is just total game changer.
Right.
Yeah, it is. Sorry, go ahead, Carrie.
Well, so along those lines, I did wonder, I mean, I just saw a statistic today that I think $520 million have been spent between both campaigns and their affiliated PACs, right? So it's not just the campaigns and PACs, but about $520 million has been spent on this runoff, on advertising, broadcast, TV, radio, et cetera. And I wonder, what we saw, of course, in the general election was dropping all that money late in the game in the final few months of an election didn't, do the trick for Democrats who were very well funded in a number of races that we thought were close. Do you think any of that did the groups, the grassroots groups, benefit at all in this past month or so from any of that enthusiasm in terms of fundraising, because they're going to be on the ground after this election's over. They're going to be building infrastructure and power, as you say, after this election is over. And they're going to be the difference between what happens now and in 2022. So do you get a sense that there was any spillover from that? Did it redound to their benefit?
I would say generally, yes, not to the tune of $520 million, unfortunately, because you are absolutely right. These are organizations that will be there after the election, and they'll be the organizations pushing our progressive messaging across the finish line, right? But I will say for the Daily Kos audience in particular, since Election Day, we've raised $1.5 million just for these organizations. And that's separate from the $2 million that we raised for candidates, right? So our small dollar donors, our small dollar donors showed up big. And they showed up even as late as yesterday when we sent out a last minute appeal to help with ballot curing, which is basically chasing voters who could be disenfranchised because their signature doesn't match or something. And so I think folks are really recognizing the power of these organizations. And also these organizations have been really good about talking about their programs. So things like Mejente, which is a Latinx organization, has talked to every single Latinx voter in the state, period. That has been their program, right? And then we have organizations like They See Blue Georgia, which focuses primarily on DESI voters who have been knocking doors in DESI neighborhoods, who've been going to grocery stores, who've been organizing via WhatsApp, which is not something I've actually done before. So I'm very excited to see how that works. Unfortunately, I've been on phones, but so we're seeing, like, go ahead.
I hate to ask this question because I know this is just going to betray my ignorance. But DESI voters, what exactly? Can you tell me what is that?
It's
what
like
that
Indian
means?
Voters, Southeast Asian
Indian
voters.
voters. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah,
that's a great question. I just assumed.
Okay.
But I'll just offer the thing that's really important about communities organizing themselves is that they're using tools that they're already familiar with. Like WhatsApp is really important within DESI communities. So they're organizing their aunties, right? Like they're organizing folks they have communities with. They're organizing people who are already on that app. They're not having to find new folks. There are also organizations like, the God New Georgia Project, who they are doing 10 touches for every single person they register to vote. 10 touches, which means that they are making sure that they're following those people throughout their entire voter process and then also inviting them into it, right? They're
like best friends.
Right? That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's more than I talk to my actual friends.
Right. But then these people are now they are active, right? They're excited about this process. They have ownership over this election in a way that they may not have had in previous elections. So the energy in Georgia is just absurd, actually. People, they're leaving it all in the field, and it's just so much joy and happiness and soul happening there. I am super impressed by these organizations and what they've been able to accomplish, with a fraction of the money that's coming into the state.
Yeah, this is a key point, and I'd love to remind people of this, that between 2016 and 2020, Donald Trump got 350,000 more votes, and he won Georgia by 5 points in 2016, right? So you win by 5 points, which is fairly comfortable. Then you add 350,000 new votes out of a total pool of what was it, about 6 million, right? So you're talking about a 15% increase. My math is probably off, but it was about a 16% increase in votes after winning by 5 points. So you're like, yeah, can't possibly win this. Democrats, Joe Biden and the Democrats, led by Stacey Abrams and dozens of organizations like the ones you've been talking about, they added 600,000 votes in 4 years, 600,000 votes. That is mind-blowing. And I don't think people understand just how dramatic that is. 600,000 new votes. That didn't happen because of $100 million spent on TV. Right. And the irony is that Georgia was the only battleground state in which Donald Trump outspent Joe Biden. This shows you how useless that money is. Biden outspent Trump in North Carolina and Florida and Texas and all the other ones that he lost, those battleground states that he lost. Didn't happen in Georgia. Trump outspent, did not matter. So these organizations, on the other hand, mattered. And one of the things I like about this show that Carrie and I, started doing is that just naturally, it didn't happen by planning, but we've gravitated towards organizers on the ground. And the other state where we had these kind of massive shifts in Democratic performance was Arizona. And so we've had a chance to talk to some of the organizers. And Monique, I'm going to ask you after the show to connect us to some of those people that you do work with so that we can feature them in the show in the future, because this is how we flip states like Georgia and moving forward states like South Carolina and, yes, Mississippi, for sure, Texas. These are states that demographically we should be competitive in, and we can do so by organizing on the ground. So we have time for one more question, Monique. So I'd like to ask you, is there one sort of vignette, one organization, you talked about WhatsApp with the DESI community. If there's just one thing that sort of pops in your mind as an anecdote that you'd like to share with us.
No. I really can't choose a favorite because all of them are so specific to the communities they work with, right? And that's actually what we want everywhere. I will say this, right now, these organizations, while they each have their own programs that are specific to their communities, and so maybe that means for Black Voters Matter, they have the bus going down to rural Georgia to make sure that people can get rides to the polls. Maybe that means they're having dance parties today, actually socially distanced in the park,
okay.
so that people can just like enjoy like the presence of one another and like recognize that this is a fun process for these folks. Like they've come together, they've fought through so much. They've been, while Republicans are out here doing absolutely nothing for them, they're showing up for each other. And so they're building the Georgia of our dreams, right? And they're doing it in real time and they're going to keep showing up. So I would just offer right now, the big push is around ballot curing. We know that there are already about 3,000 ballots that could be thrown out. And so we've already started the phone banking, we've already started the door knocking, making sure that we're chasing down these voters so we can get their signature matched or whatever it may be. And we're going to have even more of that in the next couple of days, right? We know that tonight we won't know the election results. We may not even know it by Friday. I hope we know it by Friday. But so it's not too late to volunteer. It's not too late to donate. These organizations are still doing the thing. And even after this election, there's so much more promise for Georgia that I hope we continue showing up for them.
Monique, you're on Twitter, right?
Of course I am.
What's your Twitter handle?
At Tealbomb, TEALBOMB.
Okay, so why don't you, because I know we have a fundraising page for like a dozen or 14 of these organizations, these grassroots organizations. Why don't you tweet it out, say these are the organizations we talked about, and I'll retweet it, maybe Marcos will retweet it, and anybody who wants to give to those organizations can do so through that fundraising page.
Sounds great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Georgia isn't over, guys. Even today, hopefully we win today, but then we have to fight for Governor Stacey Abrams, future Governor Stacey Abrams in 2022, plus the special election winner. So that would be Raphael Warnock. We would have to hopefully defend his seat again in 2 years. And then we got 2024, and this isn't going to end for a while. So let's help these organizations that are transforming Georgia before our very eyes. Monique, it's always such a pleasure to have you. I love your energy, and I love what we've been able to do. And I love supporting other groups. That's one of the things I really love about Daily Kos. It's not about us. It's about how we can support groups doing on-the-ground organizing. And you're right there on the front lines of that. So thank you so very much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Wow. Every time Monique is on, I'm like, oh wow, we're doing great stuff there. I mean,
right. Actually,
and not to take any credit, like I'm saying we, but I mean Democrats, like it's a but umbrella statement, but like not to take any credit. The groups on the ground are doing amazing stuff there.
It is. Arizona and Georgia are truly the model. We're seeing that work in Texas too. They're the bigger states taking a lot, longer to transform, but it's happening. And so we have these incredible models. They're doing it the right way. And it just pains me to see $500 million spent on TV ads that really don't build any infrastructure and don't change anybody's mind. I mean, who's going to vote for Trump and saw an ad and said, you know what, I'm going to vote for Biden after all. Like that person did not exist.
I feel one thing I feel really proud about and was interested to hear is Monique say that while we raised about $2 million for, on the Daily Kos site and from Daily Kos readers, et cetera, our loyal readership and the reason we exist in the first place, we raised about $2 million for the campaigns, but we raised about $1.5 million for these groups. And that's actually real. I'm impressed
more exciting
with that number. Yeah.
I love our community. So our next guest, I should be more prepared, but I think it's Kara Zelaya, who's a frequent guest. It is.
Hi.
And there she is. Yes.
And I put my title this time for you, Marcos. I'm the content strategist.
I literally ask this every time because she does so much that I finally am like, wait, I see her fingers on so many different pots. Like, which one is her title one? Content strategist. I guess it's broad enough to encompass everything that you do. Kara has been a regular guest of ours and guest co-host, but she mostly has been focusing when she joins us. She talks about the youth vote. It's clearly a passion of hers. And you turned 30, right? So
I just turned 30, yes.
You've aged out of the 18 to 29 group, but you're close enough that you still taste it.
Yeah.
So I know you've been definitely following the youth numbers in Georgia. What can you tell us about how things are looking? Not today, we don't know today, but in the early voting period.
Well, as of a week ago, which is when we've gotten the most solid numbers, 90,000 new voters had voted early that didn't vote in November between the ages of 18 and 29. So
90.
that's 90,000 new votes from young people. So that's not insignificant.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And
we talked about this earlier, but you're specifically saying not the 90,000, you're associated the 90,000 with people, with voters under 30, which is very specific.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. Yeah.
Of those, 4,400 are 18 years old. So they just turned 18 and they immediately registered to vote. So it's really exciting because 18 years old is being born in what, 2002? So these are voters that have never voted before, have taken the initiative to vote in a runoff election, which usually is not a particularly exciting first vote for an 18-year-old. And they're very hyper engaged.
Can I just
Did you say 2002?
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
No. So old. Sorry,
can I just no, that's okay. That's all right. You guys have fun. I'm getting serious over here. I'm serious. No, I'm kidding. Let me just throw this out because this is in a Washington Post article, and I was reading, it was about the youth energy continuing from the youth voter energy in Georgia, continuing from the general election into the runoffs. And they talked to this kid, George Lefkowitz, who turned 18 just a few days after the November 3rd vote. And he had already cast his votes for the Republicans. No, I'm just kidding. For the Democrats.
Plot twist.
Plot twist. I gotcha. No, he had voted for the Democrats, and he gave this quote to them, and he was really enthused about the get out the vote effort, and he was involved. And he said, if you ask young people back in 2013, we wouldn't really be caring about a government shutdown over the debt ceiling. He explained, but he said, quote, when you have a president on Twitter who's going insane, it's a little easier for the young population to digest. So Trump has provided some clarifying moments for kids who are like, oh my God, we've got a nut job running the nation.
Absolutely. And not even just on Twitter. In fact, one of the things that I'm going to talk about today is something that I feel does even age me because I get made fun of on TikTok because I'm a millennial and TikTok is all about Gen Z. But John Ossoff specifically has been on TikTok, putting TikToks up like every day. And it is a real way that Gen Zers are organizing. Famously, when Trump did his rally in Oklahoma, a bunch of Gen Zers on TikTok got a bunch of tickets, and then they like seized all the tickets, and then people couldn't get them who actually wanted to go to the rally. And I mean, I'm on TikTok to keep in touch with the youth, and I'm scrolling, and my TikTok's a lot of like politics as it normally is, but it's also like every once in a while the feed will give you someone who's like talking about astrology or whatever young people are really into, and then they'll like cut halfway through their TikTok and talk about how important it is to vote in Georgia and how our future is determined by votes. So you see these unbelievable ways of like remixing activism. And since Donald Trump is so insane and memeable, it's easy to understand, oh, this is funny and terrible, but also now we can do something. And since they're sitting at home, because a lot of them aren't going to school, they're even more online than usual. And it's kind of impossible to avoid. And now there is that sort of like shame aspect where it's like, oh, you're not involved, you're not voting. Now voting is the thing to do because what else are they going to do?
Right. Yeah. So the number of new voters that didn't vote in the general election, if you look at a percentage wise, it's about 3% of the general election turnout, right? And you think, well, 3% isn't that much. 100,000 voters maybe isn't that much. But remember that Joe Biden won by 11,000 votes, right? Yeah. And the
11,799, I think, because wasn't Trump trying to find 11,800, which is one more than he needed, or something like that.
That would be suspicious at all. Just randomly found +1. And when you see, and going back to sort of Monique's conversation before, you're talking about the DESI community in or the Latino community. Latinos are only about 3% of Georgia. And if you're looking at eligible voters, it's probably half of that, because Latino community in general a lot of them are immigrants and a lot of them are young.
Yeah.
And we could talk about the record turnout. And so when you win an election by 11,000 votes, it means that everybody was the margin of victory. And you need to squeeze out every single one of those votes. So to come out and say we got 100,000 new voters, and we don't know what percentage are ours, but the numbers look pretty good. So let's say it's 70-30. So it nets us an extra 40,000 votes. That's a big deal in an election that in the end may only be won by 10,000 votes. And this is why it's so exciting to see. It wasn't Stacey Abrams coming in and saying, look at my org, we're going to organize Black voters. It's creating a model that then was replicated in it. So you have organizations that are in the orbit of a Stacey Abrams, but they're targeting the Desi community, the South Asian Indian community, the Latino community, the Asian American community, and then youth. I mean, I think there was an organization whose entire job was to find kids that had turned 18 after the November election. And you squeeze out vote by vote. You squeeze these out. And that's how you win a tight election like this.
Absolutely. And especially, and I think that there's something to be said about representation mattering a lot, because we have Warnock, who is, of course, Black, and we have Jon Ossoff, who is 33. So these are, we have a Black candidate, we have a young candidate, and that's exciting. I could understand why people my age and younger and older weren't exactly super excited about Joe Biden and were just actively voting against Donald Trump. But right now we have an occasion where we actually have two extraordinary candidates. I had the opportunity to work for the Ossoff campaign when he ran for House back in flipping the 6th. And it's just a really exciting energy to be around. Back then, he was getting made fun of because there was a video of him in college using a lightsaber. And so we ended up putting a lightsaber in every one of our offices because we thought it was funny. People are enjoying that. And now that's continuing onward. I mean, who are these Republicans that are running for office right now for Georgia? They're unbelievably unlikable. They don't have their pulse, their finger on the pulse.
David Perdue doesn't get you all excited and tingly.
Honestly, if the Republican Party had gotten in a huddle and said, let's find two of the richest, most corrupt, least empathic people that we can find, they would have come up with Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue. Kelly Loeffler is worth $500 million because, her husband runs the New York Stock Exchange.
Right.
I mean,
it's
like,
$1 billion.
Yeah. It's $500 million. It's crazy. And David Perdue is a slouch compared to that, but no slouch compared to anybody else. I think he's worth 20 million or something like that. But
I saw a tweet that maybe I'll turn into a story for Daily Kos, which is every time someone who's running for office or a Republican who is in office opposes a stimulus check, I Google their houses. And then maybe we should just start doing that. Just aerial shots of their mansions.
And it's always houses in plural.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the famous John McCain, where he couldn't answer how many houses he owned.
Yeah, exactly. It's truly, and that's one of those things too, where as a millennial, I'm very I'm not going to have houses. If I have a house, it will be a miracle. If I ever get out of student debt, So it's one of those things where it just is so obscene. And during a pandemic, it couldn't be more tone deaf. I saw another tweet that said something along the lines of, if they just ran a robot that said socialism is bad, it would still generate the same amount of votes as these horrible candidates, because it is. And that is something that I want to say, which is, I do want to tell people that unfortunately we are still a very divided country when it comes to our politics. People are very much cling to being a Republican, definitely still in places like Georgia. So are we seeing a change? Are we seeing new voters? Are we seeing people exit the electorate? Absolutely. But a lot of white voters and a lot of white young voters take some sort of, pride or personal identity in being Republicans. And we have to figure out how to fully dismantle that, because at this point, what else do we have to do to get you to leave the dark side?
And if we had a democratic country where the president was elected by the popular vote and the Senate was actually based on population, not cows and land, that might not matter as much.
Right.
So the reason they matter, right, sort of this legacy of this white supremacist system, that literally was designed to keep these people in power. And that's what we're fighting against, because democracy, we wouldn't have a problem. And this is why Republicans at this point are even giving up on basic democracy, because even that is starting to not be enough to stem the tide of this new changing democratically diverse nation. So now we can't, all the advantages that they have, and they still want to subvert that democracy even more because it's not working for them.
At the same time, though, I think we are changing demographically. I read a stat that said something that like college freshmen this year are much more likely to identify as queer than as Republican. So that's pretty great.
Whoa. Whoa. Whoa.
That doesn't mean that they're Democrats, but
that is as a queer person, that is something that I like to hear. Yeah. But I think it's interesting though. We in the meantime, I mean, what you said is true, Marcos, about, well, if we had, a popularly elected president, et cetera. But in the meantime, we're stuck with the system we have, right? So, we have to claw back, Kara's saying somehow we've got to dismantle the dark side. And it's hard to imagine. And two things, given that we're so polarized and people just identify as Republican and they sort of cling to that identity, two things come to mind. One is when we were talking to Joe Trippi, and he was saying, Marcos, when we talked to him, that he had watched these the groups, the what do you call them? The
focus groups.
Yeah, the focus group. Sorry, that's why I was losing. I mean, this is what happens when I don't get enough sleep. But anyway, as with a child and whatever, it's just the sleep is. I mean, the thoughts go into my head and out of my head within 5 seconds. So they're just gone. But anyway, these focus groups, and he was saying that he was watching women who just detested Donald Trump, but could barely get the word Democrat out of their mouth because it was such a dirty word, and that they would kind of like look down at their shoes and say, I guess I'm going to vote for a Democrat. And it was just like, it was just like ripping their gut open to actually say the word because the term Democrat had been so sullied. And, there's a lot of like people on the left who are like, well, should we call ourselves progressives or liberals or whatever? Forget about that. That's not the problem. The Democrat is, there's people who are so affiliated with Republicans and have been so soured on the Democratic brand that Democrat alone is enough of a lift. But at the same time, so go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, so we're running short on time, but I don't want to give up on Kara. So Kara, stay on. Can we bring on Carolyn Fiddler, and let's just turn this into a panel discussion. So joining us now is Carolyn Fiddler. She is a communications director at Daily Kos, and she is also the nation's foremost authority on state legislatures. So she is a local politics savant.
I like it.
Carolyn, so I didn't mean to interrupt you, Carrie. I just want to make sure that we get.
No. Let's toss to Carolyn. She's got something I'm sure more brilliant to say than I have. So I was just filling the minutes.
Okay. So Carolyn, so you've been observing. Boy, even now I've lost my ability to distinguish between words. But you've been watching this special election play out. So what's your takeaway right now? Like, what are you feeling?
I refuse to be optimistic about a runoff in Georgia. I can't do it. I am incapable. I'm already like in the like headspace of these nasty state legislative sessions that are convening this week, and just thinking about the future. I mean, Georgia's not the only election today. The very first special elections of 2021, 2022 are also happening today, specifically in Virginia. So,
is this the guy who died of AIDS? Or is
that no, the guy who died of COVID.
AIDS of COVID, right?
No,
the legislator.
Sorry, his special election will be later. There were two Democratic seats that are up today. One, Jennifer Carroll Floyd resigned to run for governor full time, and another was appointed judge. So
Carolyn, one thing that you have, you're from Virginia. You know Virginia politics better than probably anywhere else, I suspect. Virginia was a solidly Republican Southern state that then was a battleground for a few cycles and now is solidly blue. We saw that also happen in Colorado, right? And so when you look at Georgia, do you get a sense of deja vu, or are there differences in sort of that transition from solid red to now competitive?
There are differences, but there are enough parallels that I'm actually really glad that you brought that up. I think the process will be slower for Georgia than it was for Virginia, but I do see it kind of trending in that direction. And Colorado was even faster than Virginia. But in terms of like the infrastructure that's being built right now, people are finally feeling like it's okay to be a Democrat. That was, people didn't put their party on their signs when they ran as a Democrat in most parts of that state until recently. So the culture there is changing, and that's going to have a lasting effect for the Democratic Party, a positive one.
Not only that, but Georgia's also becoming significantly younger. People are moving. Atlanta has become a huge hub that people live in, as places like LA and New York and, even Chicago are places that are kind of priced out for young people. Georgia's a really good place to go. I know, as someone who moved to Georgia and lived in Atlanta for a little bit because it was affordable and I could do it. It really is an exciting place to be. And the people that are going to Georgia are increasingly young, increasingly diverse minority groups. So there is something to look forward to there.
Oh, for sure. And that was part of what happened in Virginia as well. The city, especially Northern Virginia, exploded. So
yeah, there's going to be some shifts in the coming years, I think, with the work at home culture now in the tech world, which is a heavily liberal. There's some libertarianism, but it's very democratic voting constituency, and they're leaving the Bay Area because it's too expensive in New York, and there's been some writing about how they're all going to Austin and they're all going to Miami, and there's some of that happening, but they're also going to Atlanta, they're going to Cincinnati, they're going to Cleveland, they're going to Madison, so they're sort of spreading out. And so I love this idea of like taking a couple 100,000 San Francisco liberals and scattering them all over the country to shore up some of our margins in places. And maybe it'd be nice if they all went to Wyoming. That could be really effective. That's not happening.
I spent my first 5 years working in journalism, reporting for business journals and editing business journals. And that was always the red state advantage, was that they were, they had lower tax benefits for companies that were moving their headquarters to, places like South Carolina or North Carolina or Texas or whatever. And so every time now when I see, the migration that you're talking about, every time I see a headline of such and such tech company moving from San Francisco to Austin, I hadn't seen the Cincinnati thing. But anyway, anytime I see that, I'm like, yes. My reaction is just,
I wish they were all going to Austin and Miami. That would be great.
I wouldn't hold my breath for Miami, but I think that Georgia, too, what's really significant about it is that Atlanta is considered in many ways by political scientists to be the capital of the South. In fact, a lot of wonky academic things say that X amount of miles from Atlanta is the cultural South. So Miami, Florida isn't, but Ocala, Florida is. And so it'll be interesting to see if Georgia maintains staying a blue state, or at least a swing state, what kind of domino effect it's going to have to the entire Southeast. And whether we can see, like Marcos mentioned, Mississippi or Arkansas or Alabama, if we can see that kind of organizing that we are seeing from local groups in Georgia.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the dynamics that you're seeing is that obviously the suburbs are transforming blue, and college educated white women are a big part of that. But also a big story in that is that you're seeing out migration of Black, Asians, and Latinos to the suburbs. A lot of them being priced out of the city. Mm-hmm. So they're moving to the suburbs. And then you're starting to even see some of that bleed into the exurbs. And the exurbs right now are the last sort of massive vote getting center for Republicans. Obviously, rural areas are Republican, but they're more sparsely populated. The exurbs actually have massive Republican votes. And even then, we're talking earlier about anecdotal evidence in Georgia, and there was some Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter out in the exurbs saying that some Republicans it used to be all Republicans, but now you're starting to see Democrats show up. So there is this creeping in, and this place, I think it was Forsyth County, actually went from 70-30 Romney to like 65-35 Trump this time. So it's obviously still very Republican, but the trends are sort of creeping in our direction. And so you have this demographic shift out to the suburbs, and Atlanta is one of these places that actually attracts a lot of in-migration. And in fact, a lot of professional Black Americans go to Atlanta because it's such a great place to be as far as Black culture is concerned, and tolerance and things like that. And so you have this sort of inflow, and it's sort of spreading out. And so that helps Georgia out. I don't know if it helps the places they come from, if it's the Mississippis and Alabamas of the South, but you are seeing something special and sort of wonderful and dramatic. And then, of course, you have that on the ground organizing to make sure that these people are registering and voting.
Some of that draw is even coming from way outside. I mean, I personally know, a couple people of color who have come specifically from San Francisco, from the Bay Area, and moved to Atlanta, and then also, from Brooklyn, New York, and moved to Atlanta. So you have
brother.
It's drawing people from across the country is what I'm suggesting. I mean,
no, absolutely.
Not just
my brother added Latino to Atlanta about 4 years ago. So
Georgia also has put in a lot of money into its film industry, which it's now become its second LA, basically. And so a lot of the people who were based out of LA, most of the Marvel movies that you know of have been filmed. The Hunger Games movies were all filmed in Georgia. And that's because they gave tax incentives, basically, to bring all these major companies in there. And as someone who was like leaving Atlanta as that was happening, traffic became unbearable because all of a sudden, all of these like Southern Californians, not to insult the present company.
California has a lot of Democrats to export.
Had descended onto Georgia. And it was an explosion of just like investment into the entertainment industry. And for better or for worse, during COVID, a lot of those productions have maintained like production right now in Georgia because the governor or whatever allowed for. So I don't know how safe that is, but the economy of Georgia is they're really putting a lot of money into things that tend to interest liberal leaning people, like the arts and film and
the
that kind of
stuff.
stuff.
Right. So we have about 4 minutes left. So this is a good time if anybody wants to talk about any sort of wrapping thoughts. Carolyn, do you have something you want to?
Yes. I want to take a moment to note the stuffed animal game in your background and in Kara's background. We have the dog. Everything's fine, and we have some Baby Yoda action. And
Baby Yoda.
I would just want to share with everyone how much life that is giving me right now. So
I don't have a great view of your booze cabinet, which was the last time that was.
I don't want to be outdone here. We've got a fair amount of stuffed animal action.
For our podcast listeners, that is a white little stuffed bear. It's very cute. And out of shot this time is Carolyn's bar, which has always gotten quite a few comments.
I guess the election's over, so she could lay off on that a little bit. Huh? The main election.
Virginia, the election's never actually over.
True. Yeah.
I'm cautiously optimistic about tonight. That's pretty much all I've got. I was, like I said, on the ground when Ossoff lost, but I don't know. I felt on the ground that I was pretty cynical then, and I thought we were going to lose, and that wasn't the narrative nationwide. So, but I think that there's a good shot. I think better than ever. And I think more importantly, we are building sustainable infrastructures if we don't win this time, that we're not going to give up and we're going to keep up the fight and contesting every district and every position.
Carrie.
I think to save the country and the republic, we have to not only build the infrastructure that we're talking about in Georgia and in the Southeast and the Sun Belt, but also, not completely cede ground in the Midwest and quote unquote heartland as we go along. Republicans have just decided, hey, we have such advantages here, built-in advantages in terms of, there being 2 senators from every state, regardless of what the population, that we can just be content to be a minority party and then every once in a while win the White House. Well, that could be disastrous. So I think we need to do both things, which is build out in the Sun Belt, but also not cede ground in some of these more rural areas. And I also think the fastest way to try and turn things around in terms of this, ideological fixation on republicanism is to just make education more accessible to everybody. The more educated people get, the better their critical thinking skills, the more likely they are to be democratic, frankly. So,
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I think that one of the biggest investments we can make in the democracy is to make education starting at the youngest ages more accessible to everybody.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's one reason Republicans are actually very hostile towards public education of all sorts, because they realize that that's actually a ticket to power or loss of power. So for me, I'm optimistic about tonight, but even if we lose, the fact that our voters turned out, and by all indications, they're turning out in really strong numbers. Republicans may a lot had to go right. Georgia is still a lean Republican state by all indications. So sort of we had, everything came together. Biden was able to sort of scrape together a win by the barest of margins. The same thing needs to happen tonight. And a lot of it just depends on whether that Donald Trump vote turns out or not. And we don't have any control over that. What we did have control over is whether our people would remain engaged, active, donating, volunteering their time, their energy, their effort, and their focus on the runoff election. And we did see that. We definitely saw it with the De La Coast community, but we saw it on the ground in Georgia. Our candidates did not lack money. They did not lack volunteers. So if we lose, it's because Georgia's still a work in progress, but we gave it our all. And that to me is what's exciting. We didn't see the drop off we were afraid of. So that bodes well for the future. So hopefully we win, but if not, we're close and we're building. So thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Kara. Thank you, Carolyn, for joining us. Monique was on earlier. Everybody, please wear your masks.
Wear your mask. It's not over.
The pandemic's not over, and we're dealing with Donald Trump's distribution efforts, which apparently are zero. So until Joe Biden comes in and takes over the operation, it might be a while before we get vaccinated. So please wear your mask and be safe. Love you all. Thank you for joining us. Please favorite Daily Coast or subscribe Daily Coast on YouTube. And then soon we'll have information on how to subscribe to our podcast. So that'll be coming here pretty soon. Thank you so very much. Catch you all next week.